Chapter 1. The Land of the Rising Sun. Imagine a land where the sun rises earlier and shines with greater intensity. A region that encompasses 9 states, 57 million inhabitants, and produces almost 1/5 of all Brazilian wealth. This is the reality of Northeast Brazil, one of the most fascinating and complex regions of our country. When we talk about the Northeast, many think of drought, difficulties, and poverty. But few know the true dimension of this land that extends over more than 1.5 million square kilometers. From Maranhão to Bahia, passing through Piauí, Ceará, Rio Grande do Norte, Paraíba, Pernambuco, Alagoas, and Sergipe, the Northeast reveals landscapes that defy any imagination. Northeastern beaches are among the most beautiful in the world. Fernando de Noronha, with its crystalline waters and exuberant marine life, is considered an ecological sanctuary. Jericoacoara in Ceará, with its giant dunes and freshwater lagoons, attracts visitors from around the world. Porto de Galinhas, Maragogi, Praia do Forte, each name evokes images of tropical paradises with coconut trees, white sands, and sea in shades of green and blue impossible to describe. But the Northeast is not just beaches. In the interior, we find Chapada Diamantina in Bahia, with its monumental waterfalls, millennial caves, and mountains that seem to touch the sky. Lençóis Maranhenses National Park presents a spectacle unique on the planet. White dunes interspersed with freshwater crystalline lagoons, forming a desert that fills with life during the rainy season. The canyons of the São Francisco River cut through the backlands with rock walls reaching hundreds of meters high. Old Chico, as it is affectionately called, is born in Minas Gerais and crosses the Northeast like a vital artery, bringing life where nature seems most hostile. Northeastern biodiversity is surprising. The Caatinga, vegetation unique in the world, harbors hundreds of endemic species, plants and animals that exist only there. During the drought, it looks like a lunar landscape, gray and lifeless. But when it rains, the backlands bloom within days, transforming into a green and flowered carpet that enchants the eyes. But behind this stunning beauty, there exists a complex and often cruel reality. The same region that enchants international tourists and possesses abundant natural resources faces historical challenges that seem insurmountable. How can such a rich land also be so unequal? How can luxury resorts and communities without access to drinking water coexist? To understand today's Northeast, with all its contradictions and paradoxes, we need to take a journey through time. We must go back to the origins when the first Portuguese arrived on these lands and established an economic and social model whose consequences we still feel 500 years later. Only then can we understand why a region so blessed by nature also bears the deepest marks of Brazilian inequality. Chapter 2. Deep Roots. The Northeast was the first region of Brazil to be colonized by the Portuguese. When Pedro Álvares Cabral landed in Porto Seguro, in southern Bahia, in 1500, a history began that would shape the destiny of millions of people for centuries to come. And that history began with sugar. For almost 200 years, the Northeast was the economic center of the Portuguese colony in America. Salvador was Brazil's first capital, and the captaincies of Pernambuco and Bahia were the richest in the entire colony. The sugar produced in northeastern mills fed Europe and filled the coffers of the Portuguese crown. At that time, Recife and Olinda were more developed and wealthier than Rio de Janeiro. But this wealth came at a high price. The economic model based on sugar created 3 characteristics that mark the Northeast to this day. First, monoculture, that is, dependence on a single export product. Second, the latifundium, the concentration of land in the hands of few. And third, slavery, which transformed millions of Africans into commodities and sustained the entire productive system. The sugar mill lords became almost feudal figures. They controlled not only the economy, but also politics and justice. Their properties were true kingdoms within the colony. They decided who lived and who died, who prospered and who went hungry. They married their daughters among the most powerful families, consolidating dynasties that would span generations. With the decline of sugar from the 19th century onwards, especially after competition from European beet sugar and sugar from the Antilles, the Northeast lost its position of economic prominence. Coffee in the Southeast assumed the role of Brazil's main export product. But the social structures created during the sugar period remained practically intact. Colonialism, a political phenomenon that dominated the Brazilian interior during the Old Republic, had its deepest roots in the Northeast. The colonials, descendants of the old sugar mill lords or new landowners, controlled local politics through a complex network of favors and dependencies. They decided elections, distributed public jobs, and kept the rural population in a permanent state of subordination. It was also during this period that a stereotyped image of the northeastern person was consolidated. For the urban centers of the southeast, which were beginning to industrialize, the northeast came to be seen as backward, archaic, a problem. The northeastern migrant seeking work was frequently called Paraiba pejoratively, regardless of their state of origin. Between the 50s and 70s of the 20th century, the Northeast experienced its greatest exodus. Millions of Northeasterners left their lands in search of opportunities in the Southeast. São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia were built with the sweat of workers from the Backlands. Entire families crowded into Pautarora trucks, precarious vehicles that took days crossing the country, in search of a future that often did not materialize. These migrants took with them their culture, their music, their cuisine, their faith. They transformed the peripheries of the major southeast cities, creating small northeasts within São Paulo and Rio. But they left behind shattered communities, entire emptied villages, abandoned lands. Land concentration continued and continues to be one of the Northeast's biggest problems. While a few possess properties the size of European countries, millions of families don't even have a piece of ground to plant on. This historical inequality in land distribution is at the root of many of the region's social problems. But what makes this land so challenging for those who live in it? What causes the same region that was the center of colonial wealth to transform into the symbol of Brazilian poverty? The answer lies partly in nature, but mainly in how men dealt with it. Chapter 3. The Backlands and Their Droughts. The Backlands will become sea, and the sea will become backlands. This prophecy, attributed to Antonio Conselheiro, leader of the Canudos movement, poetically summarizes the complex relationship between the northeastern person and their environment. The Sertão, this arid vastness that occupies much of the northeastern interior, is simultaneously home and challenge for more than 27 million Brazilians. The northeastern semi-arid region, also known as the Drought Polygon, covers approximately 1 million square kilometers. To get an idea of the dimension, this is almost the size of France and Spain combined. It is the most populous semi-arid region on the planet. While other deserts and dry regions of the world have very few inhabitants, the northeastern backlands pulse with life, cities, farms, and rural communities. But why is this region so dry? The explanation lies in geography and meteorology. The northeastern semi-arid region is in an area where hot and dry air masses predominate during most of the year. The mountain ranges and plateaus block the passage of moisture-laden clouds coming from the ocean. Evaporation is intense. Water evaporates faster than it falls. While the average rainfall in Brazil is about 1,600 millimeters per year, in the semi-arid region, this average barely reaches 800 millimeters. And worse, these rains are irregular and poorly distributed. It can rain a lot in 1 year, and almost nothing in the next 3. 300 millimeters can fall in 1 week, and then go 10 months without a drop. This unpredictability makes traditional agriculture impossible. Planting in the backlands is always a risk, a bet against nature. The great droughts mark the northeastern collective memory. The drought of 1877 to 1879 killed 500,000 people. The one in 1932 caused mass exodus and scenes of misery that shocked the country. The ones in 1958, in 1983, from 2012 to 2017, each left its marks of suffering and death. During prolonged droughts, the scenario is apocalyptic. Reservoirs that seemed eternal dry up completely, revealing cracked bottoms where there was once water. Cattle die by the thousands. Skeletons bleached by the sun mark the path of the herds. Entire crops are lost. Families abandon their homes, often never to return. But here arises one of the greatest northeastern paradoxes. The problem is not just the lack of water, but also its management. The Northeast has perennial rivers like the São Francisco, Parnaíba, and Jaguaribe. It has enormous underground aquifers. It has hundreds of reservoirs built throughout the 20th century. So why doesn't water reach everyone? The answer lies in the so-called drought industry. For decades, unscrupulous politicians used drought as electoral currency. Powerful ranchers concentrated access to water, controlling reservoirs and wells. Water trucks became instruments of political domination, water in exchange for votes. Water infrastructure projects were overpriced and often never completed. The most tragic thing is that it frequently rains in the backlands, but the water is not adequately stored. It runs superficially, causing sudden floods, and then disappears, absorbed by the parched earth or evaporated by the relentless sun. Cistern projects, underground dams, and other capture and storage technologies exist, but their implementation has always been limited by lack of political will and resources. Family farming is the most affected. Small farmers, without access to irrigation technologies or deep wells, depend totally on rainfall. When it fails, they lose everything. Without harvest, there is no income. Without income, there is no food. The cycle of poverty perpetuates itself. Rural exodus continues today. Young people who see no future in their parents' land migrate to northeastern capitals or to the southeast. The elderly remain attached to the land by tradition and memory, resisting bravely, but with fewer and fewer resources and hope. But is the problem really just the lack of water? Or is there something deeper, more structural, that keeps millions of Northeasterners in poverty even when the rains come and the reservoirs fill? Chapter 4. Social Contradictions. Numbers don't lie, but they reveal an uncomfortable truth. The Northeast has the lowest human development index among all Brazilian regions. Per capita income is almost half the national average. Unemployment reaches rates far above the rest of the country. And when we talk about extreme poverty in Brazil, we mainly talk about the Northeast. But what do these numbers mean in practice? They mean families who don't know if they'll have food the next day. They mean children going to school on empty stomachs. They mean adults working heavy labor under scorching sun for wages that barely pay rent. They mean mothers who must choose between buying food or medicine for a sick child. Hunger, this word that should be banned from the vocabulary of a country that is one of the world's largest food producers, is still daily reality for millions of Northeasterners. In recent years, after significant advances at the beginning of the 21st century, food insecurity has grown again. Recent studies show that more than half of the Northeastern population lives with some degree of food insecurity. This means not having a guarantee of where the next meal will come from. And we're not just talking about the backlands, isolated rural areas. Urban poverty in the Northeast is equally cruel. In the peripheries of Fortaleza, Recife, Salvador, millions of people live in precarious conditions. Houses made of wood and tarp, open sewage, water of dubious quality, endemic violence. These are Northeasts within the Northeast, invisible to passing tourists, but very real for those who live there. Education, this essential tool for breaking the cycle of poverty, is still deficient. Schools without adequate structure, poorly paid teachers, students without teaching materials. Illiteracy rates in the Northeast are the highest in the country. And it's not just illiteracy in the literal sense. Functional illiteracy, the inability to understand simple texts or perform basic mathematical operations, reaches alarming proportions. Access to health is another drama. Overcrowded hospitals, lack of specialist doctors, months-long waits for simple exams. Diseases that would be easily treatable become serious or fatal due to delays in care. Infant mortality, although it has decreased in recent decades, is still significantly higher than in the South and Southeast. But perhaps the most shocking contradiction is spatial. In the Northeast, inequality is visible to the naked eye. On one side, luxury resorts where tourists pay thousands of reais per night have access to pools, sophisticated restaurants, all imaginable comforts. On the other side of the street, literally, communities where piped water is lacking, electricity is unstable, and houses barely protect from rain. In Fernando de Noronha, while wealthy tourists dive in crystalline waters and stay in charming inns, natives face extremely high cost of living and limited opportunities. In Porto de Galinhas, tourism employment is seasonal and poorly paid, while profits go to large economic groups. Income concentration in the Northeast is among the highest in the country, which is already a world champion in inequality. Very few families control much of the wealth, land, and businesses. Meanwhile, millions survive on less than one minimum wage per month. The land issue remains central. Unproductive latifundia coexist with millions of landless people. Large irrigation projects, financed with public money, mainly benefit large producers, while small farmers have no access to credit or technical assistance. And there's still corruption, this cancer that corrodes institutions. Diversion of resources destined to combat drought. Overpriced works that are never finished. Social programs used for electoral purposes. School meals of dubious quality because someone profited from the difference. Each diverted reel is a plate of food that didn't reach a poor family's table. Water, such a scarce and disputed resource, becomes an instrument of power. Politicians control distribution through water trucks. Large ranchers monopolize reservoirs and wells. While some have pools and abundant irrigation, neighbors a few kilometers away don't have water, even to drink. But the Northeast is not only difficulty. It would be unfair and incorrect to reduce such a complex region only to its problems. Because if there's something that truly characterizes the Northeast, it's resistance. The ability to not just survive, but to create beauty, art, joy, even in the most adverse conditions. And that's what we need to talk about now. Chapter 5, Culture and Resilience. There's a popular saying in the Northeast that goes, "The Backlander is above all strong." This phrase, immortalized by Euclides da Cunha in Os Surdos, captures the essence of a people who transformed adversity into identity, suffering into art, pain into poetry. Northeastern culture is one of the richest and most vibrant in Brazil. Nowhere else in the country is popular culture so present, so alive, so integrated into people's daily lives. It's culture that isn't just in museums or theaters, but in the streets, squares, fairs, and homes. Northeastern literature gave Brazil some of its greatest writers. Graciliano Ramos, with his barren lives, portrayed like no one else the harshness of life in the Backlands, the drought that dehumanizes, but also the resistance that dignifies. Jorge Amado transformed Bahia into a character, with his stories of sailors, prostitutes, street children, bandits, and ranchers. Ariano Suassuna created his own universe where the erudite and popular mix were Pedro Malasartes and Don Quixote converse. Rachel de Queiroz was the first woman to enter the Brazilian Academy of Letters, paving the way for generations of women writers. João Cabral de Melo Neto elevated Brazilian poetry to new heights with his precise and striking language. Death and Life of a Severino is required reading to understand not only the Northeast but Brazil. In music, the Northeast is inexhaustible. Foro, born in the Backlands, animates parties from north to south of the country. Luiz Gonzaga, the king of Baião, transformed the sound of the accordion into a regional anthem. Dominguinhos, Jackson do Pandeiro, Marines, Elber Ramalho, Alço Valenca. Each name represents a different facet of Northeastern music. But it's not just Foro. The Northeast gave Brazil Frevo, this acrobatic dance from Pernambuco that defies gravity. Maracatu, with its ancestral drums that echo Africa. Samba de Roda from Recôncavo Baiano, recognized by UNESCO as humanity's heritage. Coco Baião Zote Saxado, each rhythm tells a story. Northeastern popular festivals are spectacles in themselves. The Northeastern São João is the world's largest June festival. Cities like Campina Grande and Caruru receive millions of visitors during the month of June. It's 30 days of continuous celebration, with shows, quadrilhas, typical foods, bonfires. It's tradition that renews itself every year, keeping an ancient culture alive. The Northeastern Carnival rivals Rio's in animation and creativity. In Salvador, sound trucks drag crowds through the streets in a democratic party where everyone can participate. In Olinda and Recife, giant puppets, street blocks, and Frevo create a unique environment. Each city has its own way of celebrating. Bumba Meu Boy, especially strong in Maranhão, is a spectacle that mixes theater, music, and dance, telling and retelling a story that crosses generations. Cavalhadas, riasados, pastores, cultural manifestations that date back to colonial times but remain alive. Northeastern cuisine is an explosion of flavors. Bahian acreage, fried in dend oil, is more than food. It's an offering to the Oryxes, a connection with Africa. Buchada de bode, a delicacy from the Backlands. Sarapatel, carne de sol with cassava, Baião de Dois. Tapioca, in its 1,000 variations. Pernambuco's Biolo de Rolo, a masterpiece of confectionery. Cocada, dulce de leche rapadura, sugar transformed into art. And there's also Northeastern humor, this extraordinary ability to laugh at one's own misfortunes. The repentistas, poets who improvise verses and sung duels, turn words into weapons and toys. They transform politics into jokes, tragedy into comedy, hard life into reason to laugh. It's not humor of resignation, but of resistance. It's laughing so as not to cry, mocking the boss, the corrupt politician, misery itself. Cordel, fair literature, is the people's newspaper. In simple but profound verses, Cordel writers tell stories of bandits, saints, politicians, everyday events. It's literature that doesn't need a diploma to be appreciated, that you buy for a few reis at the fair and read in the shade of a tree. And what about handicrafts? The lace makers of Serra, who create with thread and needle works of art that take months to complete. The ceramists of Alto do Mora in Caruru, who perpetuate the tradition of Master Vitalino. The sculptors of Carancas from the São Francisco River. Each piece tells a story, preserves a tradition, keeps an identity alive. The Northeast gave Brazil personalities who marked history. We already mentioned Luiz Gonzaga, but there are many others. Cazuza, poet-rocker who revolutionized Brazilian music in the 80s. Chico Science, who created Manguebeat, a fusion of maracatu with rock and hip-hop. Alcione the Maram, queen of samba. Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil, Baians who transformed Brazilian popular music. And in sports, the Northeast revealed stars like Socrates, Rivaldo, Neymar. In cinema, there's Karim Ainuz, Kleber Mendonça Filho. Chapter 6, New Horizons. If we visited the Pernambuco Backlands 20 years ago and returned today, we would see a significant transformation. We're not talking about radical changes that solved all problems, but concrete alterations that improve the lives of millions of people. Today's Northeast is not the same as decades ago. The most emblematic and controversial project is the São Francisco River transposition. For decades, it was an electoral promise, a project always postponed, a source of controversy among environmentalists, riverside communities, and governments. Finally completed, it carries water from the old Chico to historically dry regions of Pernambuco, Paraíba, Serra, and Rio Grande do Norte. The results are ambiguous. On one hand, cities that depended on water trucks now have piped water. Farmers can irrigate their crops. Reservoirs that dried up every year now maintain reasonable levels. On the other hand, the project mainly benefited large landowners and cities, leaving many rural communities still without access. The cost was much higher than predicted, there were corruption allegations, and environmental impacts are still being assessed. But regardless of criticism, the transposition represents a paradigm shift, the idea that it's possible and necessary to adapt infrastructure to the region's climatic reality, instead of just waiting for nature to be generous. Another significant transformation came from cisterns. Government programs and NGOs built over 1 million plate cisterns in rural communities of the semi-arid region. They're simple, low-cost reservoirs that capture rainwater from roofs. Each cistern stores 16,000 liters, enough for a family of 5 to have drinking water for 8 months of drought. The impact is immense. Women who spent hours daily fetching water from distant wells now have water at home. Children get sick less from waterborne diseases. Families gain autonomy, no longer depending on politicians for access to this basic resource. Beyond consumption cisterns, production cistern technologies were developed, larger reservoirs that allow small-scale irrigation, animal raising, vegetable gardens. These are solutions that work with drought, not against it. The concept changed from fighting drought to coexisting with the semi-arid. One of the greatest transformations, however, is happening literally in the air. The Northeast has become Brazil's main renewable energy generating region. The constant winds of the coast and interior are ideal for wind energy. Today, the Northeast accounts for about 90% of wind energy generated in the country. Wind farms spread across the landscape, especially in Rio Grande do Norte, Serra, Bahia, and Piauí. There are thousands of wind turbines, those large white windmills, transforming wind into electricity. And the potential is much greater. It's estimated that the Northeast could generate several times the energy Brazil consumes using wind alone. Solar energy is also growing exponentially. The country's sunniest region finally takes advantage of this abundant resource. Large solar plants are being built in the interior, and more homes and businesses are installing photovoltaic panels. This energy revolution brings jobs, royalties for municipalities, and places the Northeast at the forefront of the transition to clean energy. Historically poor regions now export energy to the rest of the country. Has expanded and diversified. It's no longer just beaches. Cultural tourism in historic cities like Olinda, São Luís, Salvador attracts visitors interested in colonial architecture, Afro-Brazilian culture, gastronomy. Ecotourism in Chapada Diamantina, Lençóis Maranhenses, Fernando de Noronha grows every year. And community tourism has emerged, where visitors stay in traditional communities, participate in local daily life, learn about ancestral ways of living. It's tourism that directly benefits local populations, not just large companies. Irrigated agriculture transformed the São Francisco Valley into one of the country's main fruit-growing centers. Mangoes, grapes, melons, acerola produced in the northeastern Backlands are exported to Europe, the United States, Asia. Cities like Petrolina and Juazeiro became references in modern agribusiness. Controversial, yes, because many of these projects mainly benefit large companies, use a lot of water, employ pesticides. But they undeniably generated jobs and income in previously stagnant regions. Federal universities expanded into the interior. Cities that never had higher education now have university campuses. This keeps young people in the region, generates local knowledge, creates opportunities. Social programs, especially at the beginning of the 2000s, lifted millions of Northeasterners out of extreme poverty. Bolsa Familia, later Auxílio Brasil, meant that for the first time many families had guaranteed income, even if minimal. Children could go to school instead of working. Families could buy food, clothes, medicine. The results were visible: reduction in infant mortality, increased schooling, growth in consumption. Small interior towns, previously stagnant, gained economic dynamism. The creative economy also flourishes. Northeastern handicrafts, previously sold only at local fairs, now reach national and international markets through the internet. Designers value and incorporate elements of Northeastern culture. Musicians can promote their work without depending on major record labels. All this means the Northeast is changing. Not at the necessary speed, not with the desired depth, but changing. So, given everything we've seen, the beauty and misery, the history and present, the problems and solutions, what is the true Northeast? Chapter 7, The Synthesis of a People. We've reached the end of this journey through the Brazilian Northeast, and perhaps you're wondering, after all, what is the truth about this region? Is it the tourist paradise of stunning beaches, or the land of drought and hunger? Is it the culturally richest region in the country, or the most economically backward? The answer is, all of this at the same time. The Northeast is not just one thing. It's not possible to capture its essence in a single image, a single narrative, a single adjective. The Northeast is plural, multiple, contradictory. It's modern and archaic, rich and poor, beautiful and cruel. And it's exactly in this complexity that its true identity resides. When we look at Fernando de Noronha and see one of the most beautiful places on the planet, this is the Northeast. When we see a rural family without access to drinking water, this is also the Northeast. When we hear Luis Gonzaga's music or read João Cabral's poetry, this is the Northeast. When we encounter inequality and poverty indices, this is also the Northeast. The temptation is to simplify, create stereotypes. But stereotypes are always lies, even when based on partial truths. Yes, there is drought in the Northeast, but 9 northeastern states have completely different climatic realities. The Amazonian Maranhão has nothing to do with the Serra Backlands. The humid Bahian coast is another world compared to the semi-arid interior. Yes, there is poverty in the Northeast, but there is also wealth, poorly distributed, concentrated, but existent. São Paulo has favelas as miserable as those in the Northeast. The South has serious social problems. The difference is that the Northeast carries the historical stigma, the mark of backwardness, the weight of prejudice. For a long time, talking about the Northeast meant talking about problems. It meant showing hungry children, cracked lands, migrants in powder-aura trucks. These images are real and important. We cannot hide pain, injustice. But if we stop there, if we reduce 57 million people to passive victims, we'll be committing symbolic violence as serious as the material violence we denounce. Because the Northeast is also resistance. It's the ability to create beauty where there's scarcity. It's humor in the face of tragedy. It's solidarity among those who have nothing. It's mothers who work miracles with few ingredients to feed their children. It's farmers who plant even without certainty of harvesting. It's poets who transform pain into verse. It's musicians who make people dance even when they have reasons to cry. The Northeast is fundamental to understanding Brazil. This is where colonization began. This is where the wealth that sustained the Portuguese Empire for centuries came from. This is where millions of enslaved Africans came, bringing cultures that shaped our identity. This is where millions of migrants left who built the great cities of the Southeast. Northeastern culture is not regional, it's national. The forró played in São Paulo is Northeastern. The acreage sold in Rio is Northeastern. The literature, music, cuisine we consider Brazilian have deep Northeastern roots. We are all a bit Northeastern, even if we've never set foot in the region. But recognizing cultural importance doesn't solve structural problems. The Northeast still needs serious and continuous public policies. It needs land reform that distributes land to those who want to work. It needs investment in quality education. It needs water infrastructure that reaches everyone, not just the richest. It needs public health that works. It needs an end to corruption that diverts public resources. The Northeast's future is not built only with the heroic resistance of its people, although that is essential. It's built with political decisions, economic investments, social justice. It's built by recognizing that Brazil's historical debt to the Northeast must be paid, not with handouts or welfare, but with real development opportunities. Renewable energies show one path. Coexistence with the semi-arid through appropriate technologies shows another. Valuing culture as an economic asset points to possibilities. University expansion creates human capital. These are seeds of a different future. But this future will only materialize if there's political will and social mobilization. If Northeasterners organize to demand their rights. If Brazilians from other regions recognize that the Northeast's development benefits the entire country. If we stop seeing the region as a problem and start seeing it as potential. For those who have never visited the Northeast, the invitation is made. Go and see. But don't just go to the tourist beaches, although they deserve to be visited. Also go to the interior. Talk to people. Listen to their stories. Eat the local food. Dance forró. Visit a fair. Watch a maracatu or bumba meu boi performance. Buy handicrafts directly from artisans. Conscious tourism is also a way to contribute. When you consume local products, when you stay in family-run inns, when you hire community guides, you're distributing income, strengthening the local economy. For those who are Northeastern, especially those who migrated, the message is, don't forget your roots. Be proud of your origin. Teach your children about the land you came from. Northeastern culture needs to be preserved and valued not as folklore, but as living identity. And for all of us Brazilians, it's worth reflecting. The Northeast we want for the future depends on the choices we make today. When we vote, when we consume, when we pay taxes, when we demand transparency from our leaders, all of this impacts the Northeast. The Backlands may not become sea, as Antonio Conselheiro prophesied, but they can flourish, can prosper, can offer dignified life for their millions of inhabitants. Not through miracles or messianic promises, but through persistent work, correct policies, social justice, and respect for its people. The Northeast is Brazilian, and Brazil will not be fully developed while leaving one of its most important regions behind. The Northeast's cause is not regional, it's national. It's about what kind of country we want to be. It's about whether we accept living with obscene inequalities or fight for a more just society. This 35-minute journey through the Brazilian Northeast ends here, but the true journey continues. It happens every day in the choices of millions of Northeasterners who decide to stay and fight for their land. It happens in projects that bring water, education, opportunity. It happens in art that continues to be created. It happens in resistance that doesn't bend. The Northeast is, above all, a test of our collective humanity, our capacity to see beyond stereotypes, our willingness to confront historical injustices, our courage to build a different future. And you, what will you do with the knowledge you've gained about this region so complex, so beautiful, so challenging? The answer to that question will help write the next chapters of the Brazilian Northeast's history. Yendi.